Today, this is the third session in this series, and I would like to begin with the Irish dramatic revival, and because that was something that we could not, complete in the last two sessions. So I'll begin with the Irish dramatic revival, and then we could move into poetry, and we could talk a bit about the literary terms and rhetorical figures of speech that you could look into for your MCQs. Now I'll be presenting the slides, so give me a few seconds. Could somebody respond? The slides are visible?
Yes.
Okay, sure.
No.
So, to begin with, because we are going to look at the Irish dramatic revival, which kind of comes into its own with the establishment of the Abbey Theatre in Dublin. So I won't really go back into the long, this sort of a long colonial history that Ireland has with England. But to give you a brief idea, basically Ireland, in fact, was the first nation, to be colonized as early as the 12th century. And here, however, we are going to start looking at Irish history from the beginnings of the 19th century. So 1800, 1801, this is roughly the time period when the Act of Union comes into being, and this is basically the Act of Union. What it does is it basically kind of combines Ireland with the British Empire. So Ireland becomes a part of the British Empire, and what we have therefore is the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland. This is the first important historical event in terms of modern Irish history. And then again, we have something called the Great Irish Famine, which is also called the Potato Famine. But this takes place. The duration is somewhere between 1845 to 49. So basically, what happens in this particular event is that the crops there's a potato blight, and therefore the crops are destroyed, and the rural, the peasant community in Ireland, they're obviously they incur heavy losses, but the British government does not do much to kind of compensate them for their losses, and a lot of relief measures are also cut down by the British government. So the Great Irish Famine, in fact, there's a lot of the peasantry, in fact, becomes really upset with the British government.
Could you speak slowly, please?
Sorry.
Could you speak slowly?
Oh, okay, sure. So basically, with the Great Irish Famine, what is happening is that the crops for there's a famine. The crops, there's a potato blight as well. So all the crops are destroyed, and the British government really does not do much to kind of alleviate the worries of the peasants. And these people, they turn hostile towards the government. Absolutely, there are no relief measures as such. So so this kind of brews up a lot of hostility among the peasant section of Ireland, and this is one major reason for why in 1848, in fact, there's a section of people coming together to form the Irish Revolutionary Brotherhood, or the IRB. Now, the Irish Revolutionary Brotherhood was, of course, it was this formation took place within Ireland, but then there were these also, there's this other kind of a community that comes up, a group that is kind of formed, and this happens in America. This is called the Fenian Brotherhood, and here basically these are people, these are Irish soldiers who had fought in the American Civil War, and they were therefore sympathizers of the Irish cause, and these people therefore they consolidate and themselves into this group which is called the Fenian Brotherhood, and these were basically the supporters or the sympathizers of the IRB in Ireland, but this was a group that was formed in America. Now, another major milestone would again be the year 1921, when Northern Ireland, okay, sorry, 1916. Before that, 1916, 1916, it's historically very famous because, in 1916 there was the Easter Rising. And Easter Rising was basically when the members of the Irish Revolutionary Brotherhood, the IRB, what they do is they seize all the major government buildings, in Dublin. So in the capital of Ireland, they seize all the major buildings which are government buildings, and so it's basically an act wherein they're trying to take over, the British government. So the seizing of the major government buildings in Dublin becomes really, really important. This is the Easter Rising in 1916. And then again in 1920, the UK Boundary Commission comes into Ireland, and what they do is they draw this arbitrary line across Ireland, and therefore divide the country into the north and the south. And since then, in fact, there's been a lot of controversy regarding Northern Ireland and uh, the north and the south. And so in 1920, the Boundary Commission draws that line, cutting off Ireland into the north and the south. And in 1921, Northern Ireland, as a separate kind of a, as a separate geographical entity, comes into being. And Northern Ireland, even till today, it is a very disputed geographical kind of a space. And even till today, there's a lot of debate. There's a lot of political opinion that continues to rage on about Northern Ireland. And then again, in finally in 1949, the Republic of Ireland Act was kind of instituted. And with this act, finally, what happens is that Ireland is no longer in any way dependent on the UK. And Ireland continues to be, it has its own government, its own autonomous form of government comes to be instituted in 1949 with the Republic of Ireland Act. So this is a very basic, a very, very, very basic kind of an outline of the major events that took place from the 1800s onwards to the present day. And if you are interested, you could definitely Google up these dates and know more about these events. But I'll move straight to our concern with the establishment of with the Irish Dramatic Society, with the Abbey Theatre. So one another very important event that we need to kind of look into, of course, is this particular group again comes up, which is called the United Irishmen. This group was again headed by someone called Theobald Wolfton. Now, Wolfton is like one of those really important historical figures in Ireland, and he, in fact, he Wolfton kind of uh, was the leader of the United Irishmen when it was first instituted. And there is something called the 1798 rebellion that took place in Ireland, and this was specifically, during the land wars. And there were these land. A lot of heavy taxation on land, and land, peasants could not own lands. They only could work on the land. So all of these kind of debates surrounding land were taking place at that point of time. And then in the 1798 rebellion, 1798 rebellion was kind of a direct response against the oppressive penal laws and land laws that were being kind of imposed on the Irish people. So a major, a group for that, a major group that kind of mobilized that movement was, of course, the United Irishmen. And one of the chief and very important leaders of that particular group would be someone called Theobald Wolfton. And then again, we have to look at someone called Charles Stuart Parnell. Now, Parnell is again one of those luminous, one of those really glorious figures in the history of Irish national movement. And he was associated with what came to be known as the Home League movement, and this was sometime around the 1880s. Now, Charles Stuart Parnell, in fact, has been immortalized, as it were, by James Joyce in his Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man. And Charles Stewart Parnell, he kind of he was a staunch kind of a he staunchly believed in the cause for liberation of Ireland from the colonial rule from under the colonial rule of the British government. But whatever contributions Parnell made in the earlier part of his career were kind of overlooked because of one particular incident. He was apparently, and before I get into that incident, it's important for us to remember that. Ireland as a country, the religion was kind of a disputed kind of a issue within Ireland. So you had Protestants, you had Catholics, but the Protestant community in Ireland and the Catholic community in Ireland, there was a lot of kind of a lot of dissension between them. But what happened is because Ireland at one point of time was this really strong. Because of the presence of a really strong Catholic community within Ireland, and you know how Catholics are really concerned about moral practices and moral codes and all of that. Within that kind of a socio-political religious framework, Charles Stuart Parnell, it was found out that he had an affair with a woman. Her name was Catherine O'Shea, and Catherine O'Shea was unfortunately a married woman. And so when this home league movement, and with it the demand for home rule was almost, it was almost there, and people could see that yes, we could now achieve home rule, that is independent rule within Ireland, and not under the British government. So at that particular point of time, what happens is that Charles Stuart Parnell's affair comes into light, and that kind of mars him in front of the public, and there's a lot of criticism and there's a lot of debate about this in Ireland at that point of time. And therefore whatever he did for his country was kind of very conveniently forgotten in light of his affair with a married woman. So that is Charles Stuart Parnell. And then again, we talk about this year 1893, and another very important figure within contemporary Irish history, a very important figure would be someone called Douglas Hyde. Now, Douglas Hyde again is he's basically this person who kind of one of the founding forefathers of the Gaelic League in Ireland, and we are going to get into the details of what the Gaelic League was all about. But Douglas Hyde was kind of convinced that Ireland Gaelic League, and under the chairmanship of Douglas Hyde, basically what comes out is this staunch idea of a sense of cultural nationalism. So whatever is inherently Irish, be it the language, be it the folklore, be it the music, be it, so whatever was intrinsically and inherently Irish, whatever was intrinsically and inherently related to Irish culture, all of that was championed in opposition to, of course, whatever symbolized or whatever came to symbolize English culture. So this very staunch dichotomy was drawn, a very strong division was drawn between Irish culture and English culture, and Irish culture was simultaneously champion. So this was basically what the Gaelic League were doing, and Douglas Hyde was one of the most kind of formidable figures associated with the Gaelic League. And then again, in this timeline, we come to 1904, and this again is a very important year because, of course, in 1904 we see that the Abbey Theatre gets kind of situated and established and institutionalized, and this kind of, in fact, marks the onset of the Irish dramatic revival. Now, the Irish dramatic revival or the Irish literary revival is in many ways, it's called by several names. It's also called the Celtic revival, the Celtic twilight as well. So all of these terms that you need to be familiar with. And with the Abbey Theatre, we have three personalities, is really two personalities as such, that who become really, really important. So first, of course, is William Butler Yeats, and then, of course, Lady Augusta Gregory. And then again, there's someone called James Singh, John Millington Singh. He's also a playwright. And these three people were kind of like the the kind of the first, we could say, the founding fathers of the Abbey Theatre. But the other thing to remember again in terms of a timeline would be that in 1913, so Abbey Theatre gets established sometime around 1904, and then in the year 1913, Lady Augusta Gregory, she writes this manifesto of the Irish theatre, and this is called Our Irish Theatre. So this is a very important manifesto that kind of lays down the aims and the goals of the Irish theatre. So what are the relevant points along which the Irish theatre would function? What why was it even wh- why was it even necessary to kind of come up with a different theatre altogether in Ireland? So all of that is kind of she jots down all of that within this manifesto of 1913, which is called Our Irish Theatre, and this was written by Lady Augusta Gregory. And the other thing that I think we discussed in the very first session when we were doing Elizabethan literature, if you remember that I spoke about Edmund Spenser and how Spenser was sent on this special dispatch to Ireland, and there when he comes back, he writes a kind of a report, and he writes this tract which is called A View of the Present State of Ireland. So these are some of the basic things that we need to remember when we start out with the Irish Dramatic Revival. Now, I mentioned that Lady Gregory writes that treatise, Our Irish Theatre. So basically, let's look at what Lady Gregory talks about. In fact, so the basic aim and like what were the motivations for the Irish Dramatic Society? So she says that the Irish Dramatic Society would basically focus on presenting a certain kind of play. Only certain types of plays would be performed and put on the stage for the audience. So these would be basically only Irish and Celtic plays which are inherently Irish in origin, which would demonstrate the Irish and the Celtic culture. So, and this would in fact give rise to an entire school of Celtic and Irish dramatic literature. That was one of the major motivations for the establishment of the Abbey Theatre as such. And then again, she says that the quest here would be for an imaginative and uncorrupted Irish audience. Now, this again becomes this kind of a statement becomes particularly kind of controversial when we look at the kind of plays that someone like W.B. Yeats was writing, as opposed to the kind of plays that James Singh was writing. So when she says that the aim would be the aim for the dramatists associated with the Irish Dramatic Society would be the quest for an imaginative and uncorrupted Irish audience. So the implication, one major implication, is that of course that uh, the in the usage of this word uncorrupted Irish audience, obviously the hint is that as a result of colonialism, as a result of the British colonialism within Ireland, the virtues and the moralities of the Irish people have been corrupted. So basically, English culture has come in to this pristine and absolutely, this absolutely glorious and pristine land of Ireland, and Irish and English culture has come in and polluted and corrupted Ireland. That is the idea. So we need to go back. So why is it called a revival, right? It's called a revival because there's this intrinsic idea of going back to an unpolluted, uncorrupted Ireland of the previous times. So basically, what she's trying to do is she's trying to negate the historical event of colonialism in this way. But this implication has major problems, and that we will talk about. But let's move on to the next motivation that she talks about. She says that the plays that would be staged within the Irish dramatic within the Abbey Theatre and within the Dramatic Society would of course be plays that would kind of showcase and exhibit the deeper thoughts and emotions of Ireland. So what basically she's driving at is that she's driving at, she's harping on this really purist, an essentialized and a very purist and absolutist, uncorrupted Ireland that existed before British colonialism came into the picture. And then again she kind of kind of talks about the English theater. She says that within the English theater there is the English theater is really monotonous, and there is no kind of there is no creativity, and there is no experimentation of sorts. It's the same drab old monotonous kind of dramas that the Irish audience is being served. And so we need a different kind of theater that is entirely inherently Irish. And what would be our subject, and what would be the subject matter of these plays? The subject matter would of course be the ancient imaginative ideas of Ireland, the Celtic mythology and folklore. So these would be the ideas that they would kind of focus on in their new Irish plays. And this one thing that she says, and this is a very important quotation from Lady Gregory's tract. She says that Ireland is not the home of buffoonery and easy sentiment. It is in fact the home of an ancient idealism. So basically, the idea is that the English, and you'll be able to understand this better when we look at what Edmund Spenser wrote in his tract. So basically, Edmund Spenser, in his short view of the present state of Ireland or whatever it was, he writes in that particular tract. He writes that the Irish are these really vile, repulsive, barbaric nation, and the people, they're really vile, repulsive and barbaric. They are not civilized enough. They live like animals. They are barbarians. And the Irish were described, in fact, their entire attire, their sense of clothing, all of that, their mannerisms, all of that was described by Spencer in great detail. And he takes, I think, he makes a lot of effort to vilify the Irish as best as he can. So, in one particular section in his tract, Spencer says that the Irish, they keep this long beards, and the beards, they cover their whole faces and kind of makes them look even more suspicious. So their choice of keeping long hair and facial hair kind of makes them look suspicious. That is something that Edmund Spencer says about the Irish. And then he says that the Irish wear these really loose kind of robes and garments that they cover themselves up with, and that kind of is not so sophisticated as vis-a-vis our English culture. So these are some of the accusations that Edmund Spenser hurls at the Irish. So from then onwards, within the English the English mentality has been such that time and again the Irish are thought of as as the other of England, as the psychological other of England. So whatever England comes to signify, Ireland is exactly the opposite of that. That is the idea. So if England is, if England is, so a certain sense of a dichotomy is almost built up. So if England is masculine, if England is sophisticated, if England has culture, then Ireland does not have culture. Ireland is barbaric. Irish people are vile. They are repulsive. So this is the kind of a psychological kind of an othering that steadily continues from the time of the publication of Edmund Spencer's tract. So Lady Gregory, within her manifesto, she's trying to counter that kind of an Irish, representation. She says, therefore, that Ireland, as contrary to popular belief, Ireland is not, in fact, the home of buffoonery and easy sentiment. Irish people are not stupid fools. They are not, emotional fools. In fact, Ireland is the home of an ancient idealism. That is what she says. And then again, within the kind of drama that was being written, especially for the Celtic revival and the Irish literary dramatic society, language becomes the bone of contention. Language becomes the very realm over which several battles are fought. And therefore, one of the things that any colonizing nation, the colonizer would try to do is they would try to impose their language, their culture, and whatever their culture, whatever other registers that their culture is composed of, all of that would be imposed on the country that is being colonized. So this is not something that is simply peculiar to Ireland. We see that in any other talk about any other country, especially let's look at India. In India, when the British came and they colonized India, the main thing that they wanted to do, and one of the major areas of thrust as far as the colonization was concerned, was that imposing Christianity, the Christian religion, and the English language on the native people of the soil in India. So that is something that the British also do in Ireland. So they're trying to do away with the Gaelic, the ancient Gaelic dialect and the Celtic dialect. And what they're trying to do is they're trying to replace the Celtic Gaelic dialect with the English dialect. So language, therefore, kind of becomes one of those registers which the Irish people, they want to, they want to reclaim their indigenous native language back. So language becomes a very important factor within the ambit of the dramatic society. So the dialect within these plays, the basic aim is that, as far as language is concerned, is that the Celtic dialect should be preserved. So we see that the establishment of the Irish Dramatic Society was in many ways not simply a cultural kind of a revival, it was also a nationalist, a cultural nationalist kind of a it kind of it kind of brought up that cultural nationalist forward as well. So through theater we are going to propagate nationalist ideals, and that would eventually help us to achieve the goal of liberation. That was the idea. So the struggle for self-definition, which was acted out on various registers, language, culture, religion, all of that was conducted. Was one of the major kind of thematics, one of the major thematic motivations for the Irish theatre. And I spoke about Douglas Hyde before. So Douglas Hyde, the reason I think he becomes a very important figure is because of a public lecture that he gives out, and I think it was somewhere around 1892, and the lecture is called "The Necessity for De-Anglicizing Ireland." So you can very well understand by the usage of this term de-anglicizing, so trying to do away with anything that is inherently Anglican, so anything that is inherently Anglo, anything that is inherently English. So that is the main motivation behind his lecture. This was a public lecture that he gives out in 1892, and this was called "The Necessity for De-Anglicizing Ireland." Now, the Gaelic League, in fact, was a community that looked was a kind of a formation that looked towards definitely a kind of a cultural nationalism of sorts, and within this, language again becomes one of their key concerns. So Douglas Hyde, in that particular public lecture, he criticizes those sections of the Irish population who who do not have any respect or any regard for their native language, that is the Gaelic dialect, and instead he's basically talking about men who drop their own language, that is the Gaelic dialect, and they speak English instead, the language of the colonizer. And then he says that how Irish sentiment apparently hates the English. So he talks about a kind of a double bind here. So a kind of an ambivalent, ambiguous kind of a situation that he talks about is that the Irish, on the one hand, of course, they hate the English. There's an apparent hatred of the colonizing power of the colonizer, but they still continue to imitate them. So if you hate the colonizer, you also simultaneously do not really cut off all ties with the colonized nation. You are imitating them as well. So you are imitating their language, you're imitating other forms of their culture. So this is a double bind that he identifies within the Irish psyche. How there is an act of imitation, and there is also an apparent hatred within the Irish as regards the English language and culture. And so this kind of comes to prefigure this classic post-colonial conundrum, and this is something that we also see in any, if you are familiar with any kind of a post-colonial understanding, you'll see that this is a kind of a double bind, an ambiguous kind of a situation that we see in most post-colonial, in most colonial societies, not post-colonial societies. In most colonial societies, this double bind exists, wherein you hate. There's a seeming apparent hate towards the colonizer, but then there is also a kind of imitation, a simultaneous imitation of the colonizing power. So Douglas Hyde then again says that Irishness would be, so if so basically Irish, so everything Irish would be anything Irish would be anything that is non-English. So a stark binary opposition is being set up here. So we see that anything that has anything to do with the English language, the English culture, that would not be Irish. So Irish, so whatever we could designate as Irish would be something that is inherently non-English. That was the idea that Douglas Hyde propagated. And he says that we kind of need to develop the Irish race, the Irish civilization along Irish lines without any kind of external influence from the English nation. And therefore, with all of these ideas kind of simmering, what this led to was basically the establishment of the National Irish Theatre. And what happens in this is that the stage space, the enactment of the kind of drama, the performances that would be conducted would be representative of the nation itself. So the stage space was to be read as a microcosm of the nation itself. And this is how the Irish Dramatic Society, the Abbey Theatre, in fact, its establishment kind of comes to be of such momentous importance within this kind of a cultural nationalist movement within Ireland in the early 20th century. So now we will basically be taking a look at two of the playwrights who are associated with the Irish Dramatic Revival. So the first person that we'll be looking at is, of course, William Butler Yeats. Now, William Butler Yeats, I'm talking here specifically in context of the Irish Dramatic Revival, but if if you know that, if you also know that Yeats also writes a lot of poetry as well, and mostly the themes of his poetry would be the political goings on of Ireland during his life. And he would also talk about he uses a lot of symbolism in his poetry, and this is the kind of symbolism that is associated or attached with Celtic folklore, with Celtic culture. So he talks about ancient Irish, he talks about fairies, he talks about the peasants, Irish peasants and all of that, Irish rural people and all of that. So within the corpus of William Butler Yeats's works, time and again, the dominant symbolism is, of course, an ancient pagan, Irish kind of a symbolic, situation that is going on within Yeats's poetry. That is a dominant kind of a theme, but you can look up whatever other stuff that Yeats does. But right now, here I'm concerned, of course, with this one particular play that he writes. This is called Kathleen Ni Houlihan. This is a very important play as far as Irish cultural nationalism and Irish the contributions of the Abbey Theatre is concerned. And William Butler Yeats writes this play in 1899, and the working title, of course, of this particular play was The Poor Old Woman. That was the working title, but the final title, of course, is Kathleen Ni Houlihan. So basically, another figure that we need to kind of remember as far as the Irish Dramatic Revival is concerned is, of course, someone called Maud Gonne. Now, Maud Gonne, this woman, she was this really revolutionary kind of a figure. She was also a theatre actress, and Yeats kind of had a certain fascination towards her. But as it turns out, that finally Maud Gonne kind of goes off and marries somebody else, and Yeats kind of is left heartbroken and all of that. But that is personal history. But Maud Gonne, in fact, comes to play. She played originally. She kind of was the actress who played the role of the old woman in the play, which is kind of the titular figure of the play. So Maud Gonne, in fact, plays the titular figure in the play in the very early performances. But the setting of the play, as far as Irish nationalism is concerned, is of course this place called Killala, the village of Killala in County Mayo, and this is somewhere in the west of Ireland. Now, the play basically, and what is the significance of this of setting this play in Killala? Basically, what happens is the background for the play is that. There is a landing of French troops. So a number of French troops they come to Killala at the shore in Killala, and in the year 1798. Remember, I think spoke about this previously. And in 1798, these the French troops they come to Killala. Basically, what they're doing is they're trying to help the Irish. So the Irish have kind of garnered support from the French troops, and they're trying to kind of take down the British army. So that is the basic kind of a background, the setting for the play. And in this play, the basic theme would be that it kind of arouses a very nationalist, a very political. This is a very political play, although the setting is very rural. Killala, County Mayo. This is a very rural kind of a West Ireland sort of a setting, but the play in fact poses a very spiritual question of nationalism. So nationalism, spirituality, and politics are very intricately worked through within this play. This woman, Kathleen Nihuliha, or the old woman within the play, she basically kind of symbolizes this entire construct of the nation as mother, the entire construct of nation as woman. So this inherent, sort of uh, this inherent feminization of the nation of the colonial of the nation that has been colonized. So even in India we see that construct of the mother as nation. So Bharat Mata, so that kind of a construct kind of was there also in Ireland. And this particular play kind of reinforces that construct, that Ireland is this woman, she's this mother figure, and that all the young boys in Ireland, they kind of need to rise up to the occasion. They need to go and fight for the liberation of this mother figure. So by kind of equating Ireland, by equating the colonized nation with the figure of the mother, there is this sense of a kind of this is done to exhort all the young and able-bodied men to kind of go up and fight for the liberation of the motherland. And what this kind of a construction does is, this is a very ideological construction once again. What this kind of a construction does is, it confines the figure of the Irish woman in a straitjacket of purity. So the nation, when it is pitted as a mother against the colonizing power that is Britain, that then the nation needs to embody, symbolize all that is inherently good about Ireland. So anything that has some kind of a trace of something bad, so any trace of a bad culture, any trace of anything that is not that's not prim and proper, is to be completely discarded from this figure of the nation as mother. So what this kind of a construct does is, it basically kind of prefigures, or it basically kind of symbolizes all that is good about Ireland. So in a way it kind of confines Irish womanhood. And because if Ireland is if Ireland is thought of as the mother figure, then of course all the women in Ireland, or the women folk in Ireland, they would also be simultaneously associated. They would simultaneously be worshipped as the mother figure, and therefore Irish women, they had to embody certain virtues, certain ideals, all of that. And this in fact, this kind of an ideological construction of the nation as the mother, the nation as a woman, kind of works also to on the one hand, it works to kind of it works up this kind of a zeal and revolutionary liberal zeal for freeing the motherland. And on the other hand, what it does is, and this is I think a bit problematic, because it kind of it creates these neat binary categories for women, and it kind of dissolves the woman within that kind of a purist category. So the nation as woman, Ireland as a woman, of course, confines Irish women in a straitjacket of purity. This is something that is also very common to any colonized nation. Even in India, we see that. So that is something we have to remember. And then we see that what it kind of tries to do is that the figure of the peasant within the kind of plays that were being written for the Irish Dramatic Society, for the cultural revival, the figure of the peasant becomes very important, because within the peasant's kind of existence, within the peasant's well body, or within the very self of the peasant, whatever is inherently good about the Irish is the peasant body becomes a depository almost of everything that is good about Irish culture. So Irish, so in a way, the Irish peasant comes to mark, comes to kind of signal and symbolize the pure and pristine Irish culture. So and therefore the figure of the peasant becomes very important to the cause of Irish sovereignty, Irish liberation. And this is basically the major theme of some of the plays by Singh as well. Even in some of the plays by Singh, James Singh, the Irish peasant becomes the custodian of culture as such. But well, moving on again, the kind of revivalism, the kind of Irish Celtic revivalism that Yeats was interested in was, of course, that he would kind of his aim was that he would try to present a picture of Ireland that was unsullied by British colonialism, and therefore he, for his symbols and for his plot and narrative devices and all of that, Yeats would look back to the Irish folklore and Irish myths. So this figure of Kathleen Ni Houlihan is this really kind of a very famous Irish character within Irish myth. And basically, in the original story, Kathleen Ni Houlihan, she kind of travels all across the country and tries to kind of rouse up the young men of the land to kind of go and fight for her liberation. That is the idea. And within the play, this is the same kind of thing that happens. And in the play, in Yeats's play, this old woman who is called Kathleen, she mourns the loss of the four green fields. She says that she sings a kind of a a very sad kind of a song, and within that song, within a particular line of that song, she says that she mourns the loss of four green fields. Now, the four green fields are basically the four counties in Ireland, namely Ulster, Munster, Connacht, and Leinster. These are the four counties that she mourns the loss of these counties, because obviously, as you can understand, within the context of colonialism, these counties were, under they were annexed by the British government, and they were under the administration of the British government. So the loss of four green fields, the loss of four counties in Ireland are being mourned by this protagonist, and she says that uh, 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 well, by the end of the play, what happens is that the hero of the play, this person called Michael, he's apparently he's slated to get married to a woman. But on the day, I think a day before the marriage or something like that, this old woman, Kathleen, she comes, and that is the time when the French army kind of lands at Kilala with their troops. And Michael, finally, when he hears this, the mourning of the old woman, he is not able to kind of undergo. He is not able to go through. He does not see through his marriage. In fact, he leaves right then and there, inspired by Kathleen's song. He goes out to fight for the cause of the nation. So that is something that happens in Yeats's play. But once again, what this kind of a play does is it kind of prefigures a very romantic, a poetic kind of a nationalism, because you see that each time and again he utilizes these symbolic, folkloric tropes within his narrative. So he kind of advances a romantic and poetic form of nationalism that would also be aligned with a kind of cultural nationalism that the Abbey Theatre looked forward to. So this is, I think, the most important play as far as well, William Butler Yeats's plays are concerned. This is perhaps the most important play as regards to the Irish national theatre, the cause for liberation. So this is the most important play. There are a few other plays that Yeats, of course, writes, and if you are interested, you could maybe check out those plays, read up the summaries and characters and all of that if you want. But this is the definitely the most important play as far as his contribution towards the cause of nationalism is concerned. Now, with this, we move on to James Singh or John Millington Singh. Please remember the dates for these people. I don't know if I, yeah, so remember Yeats's dates as well and Singh's dates as well. These might be important for MCQs. So Singh, he in fact writes a lot of, he produces a lot of plays for the Irish, for the Abbey Theatre. But some of his very most famous plays would be, of course, Playboy of the Western World, and then he writes In the Shadow of the Glen. These two plays, by the way, I'll be discussing today, Playboy of the Western World and In the Shadow of the Glen. The other plays that he writes, of course, Deirdre of the Sorrows, Riders to the Sea, very, very famous play again. Everyone, I think, has read it, at least in their undergrad. And then we have The Tinker's Wedding and The Veil of the Saints. Now, these plays, the remaining four plays, you could actually read them up. They're pretty important. But I would be basically talking about the first two plays. Now, I spoke about a kind of a kind of a difference of opinion within the conception of Irish national theatre and the kind of plays and the thematics of it. So, if Yeats was kind of looking back to a very pristine, unpolluted, uncluttered, and a very inherently Irish kind of a scenario within his plays, and he was looking back at the folklore and all of that. So he was looking back to an idealized past for the material of his play, and if that is what he tried to champion within his play, James Singh, on the other hand, does something that is quite different. Singh, of course, if you know, he was kind of W.B. Yeats, in fact, tells James Singh to kind of go to the Aran Islands and observe the ways of the life of the people there, and then kind of write his plays based off on that. And Singh does that. He goes to the Aran Islands for a very long time. He stays with the people within their cottage. He stays with the villagers and all of that. And he even, I think, he has a journal called the Aran Islands or something like that. He even writes a kind of a he notes down a lot in his journal, and kind of details the kind of life that these people who inhabit the islands, they kind of lead. All of that he kind of jots down. But what James Singh does in his plays is that he uh, kind of brings up for the audience in Dublin the everyday life of the people in all its vulgarity, in all its all the kind of problems that these people face on a daily level, on a daily basis. So all of that. So the kind of nationalism that James Singh was kind of propagating was in fact it was markedly different from what W.B. Yeats was doing. He was not following that, Singh was not following that romantic and that romantic and poetical kind of nationalism that Yeats was following. He tried to present a very uh, uh, down to earth, a very quotidian kind of an experience that these people they underwent in the villages and in the rural areas, right? So that is a major point of difference between the two of them. And I spoke about this theme within the kind of drama that was being written at this time, that the Irish peasant, in fact, kind of symbolized all that is good about Irish culture. So the Irish peasant inherently becomes the custodian of Irish culture. So in this kind of a framework, Ireland, of course, whatever was good in Ireland would be symbolized through Irish plays. So Irish plays would be, they could be launched off into the outer world as the pride of Ireland, as a symbol of Ireland. So within this kind of a cultural conception, James Singh kind of becomes a sort of a revolutionary figure, because he kind of exhibits his depiction, his exhibition of peasant life, rural life in Ireland is radical, because he talks about all that is supposed that people like William Butler Yeats would never dream of talking about in their plays. He all that William Butler Yeats would very readily, he would pull a rug across all of that, all of those topics. Millington Singh was taking them up, and he was talking about them. So all kinds of ills and problems within Irish femininity, within Irish peasant life, all of that became the subject matter for James Singh. So James Singh, of course, he does not really try to sanitize Irish peasant life, and in fact, what he does is he explicitly kind of talks about sexual relationships in his plays. Even in the Playboy of the Western World and in the Shadow of the Glen, there's a lot of talk about extramarital affairs and sexual relationships with men other than your proper husband. So all of that, he talks about all of that. And so he basically is not presenting a very unpolluted picture of Ireland, Irish society. He is in fact giving he's presenting to you a picture of Irish society in all its he's basically noting down all the pros and all the cons, and he's not giving you an unpolluted, pristine kind of an Irish picture of an Irish culture. So within these two plays, Playboy of the Western World and especially in the Shadow of the Glen, the figure of the woman becomes very, very important. So according to nationalist ideology and nationalist constructions, the woman was supposed to symbolize domestic harmony. Those ideas of the angel in the house, and the Victorian conception of the angel in the house, and the woman's special, proper sphere being the domestic sphere. All of those ideas. So that was in fact the framework for the nationalist conception of the woman. But in Singh's plays, time and again, what happens, and especially in the first two plays that I've noted down here, the women, the women characters, they are in fact not really this. They're not the flag bearers of morality. They're not this pristine, uncorrupted, chaste women. They are in fact morally corrupted women, and this is in fact something that was a reality in Irish rural life. And within the Playboy of the Western World, within the Shadow of the Glen, in that particular play, the figure of the woman Nora becomes really important, and I think the name Nora also would kind of resonate with a lot of people here, because Nora also is kind of the protagonist in Henrik Ibsen's Doll's House as well. So the themes are almost similar. So the sense of woman empowerment, and woman empowerment in the right way, in the proper way. So all of those themes come up. So Nora in Singh's play in the Shadow of the Glen, she becomes a kind of a representative of a non-conservative voice within the play. She is married to this old man, of course, and a man who is much older than her. And this man basically, he's trying to kind of test her loyalty, or her her fidelity within their marriage. So he kind of pretends to be dead, and Nora is she's sitting at his wake sort of, and he pretends to be dead. He covers himself up in a sheet, in a white sheet, and she's supposed to watch over his dead body until the priest arrives. Something like that is how the play begins. So basically, again, fidelity and sexual chastity, those ideas are again once again explored within the play. But Nora, as opposed to the conventional ideological construction of the idealized woman, Nora does not do that. She in fact belongs to the very subversive, non-conservative group of women. And once again, we see that within Singh's plays, and especially through his characters, Singh kind of tries to subvert that entire nationalist construct of how certain how a particular gender is supposed to embody certain values, and the concept of the separate spheres of the home and the world outside. So all of those ideas are challenged by Singh in his plays through both themes as well as characters. And Nora, in fact, in The Shadow of the Glen, she basically rejects the institution of marriage. She leaves by the end of the play. She leaves her husband, and she goes out with the tramp. She walks out with the tramp, and she thereby, what this particular act does is it basically gives her a lot of autonomy, a lot of independence, and she is finally kind of free from the bounds of the home and the hearth, and from under the control of patriarchy, and she finally goes out into the night with the tramp, and therefore she signals a kind of a sexual autonomy of sorts as well. And another very radical thing about this play is that Nora, when uh, when her husband kind of kind of he says that he has been lying, and he has been trying to kind of catch her, when she's kind of in the other room with a stranger, and he kind of suddenly, the dead husband suddenly wakes up and tries to kind of catch her red-handed. So when all of that comes out into light, Nora does not really stop short of voicing her resentment towards her old husband. She kind of very explicitly talks about the kind of problems that a woman her age, of such a young age, who's married to someone considerably older than her. So, what kind of problems does such kind of rural peasant woman have to deal with? All of that she talks about. So, the depiction of this open sense of resentment towards your husband, that was also something radical that Singh was doing in his play. So once again, the character of Nora, because it, she is kind of this exemplary figure, because she negotiates this kind of a liminal space between the patriarchal household that is symbolized by the home and the hearth, and chastity and loyalty and fidelity towards your husband, as opposed to the external world, right? As opposed to the world outside, the world where women were generally kind of instructed to not venture out. So she kinds of negotiates between these two spaces, and even in this kind of a negotiation, of course, she destabilizes traditional narratives, traditional ideological, national ideological constructs of the figure of the woman. And what other themes that this play opens up, of course, would be this debate over this marriage of convenience, because Nora says that, and what kind of becomes very explicit and becomes kind of inherent in what she says is that she has had to marry someone who is much older than her, because of the kind of financial economic conditions in rural Ireland. For a sense of, simply because out of a necessity for financial security, she has had to undergo such kind of a, almost like a transactional marriage where love is, love is basically absent. And John Butler Yeats, who was, I think, William Butler Yeats's brother, he kind of says, he kind of describes the Irish kind of institution of marriage as our Irish institution, the loveless marriage. So the marriage of convenience kind of becomes important in rural Ireland because of the socio-political economic conditions, that young women, they are married off to older men because older men have lands and they have some kind of a social capital. So these women, their families would think that their daughters' financial financial concerns, they would be kind of secured. So that was one of the motivations for marriage. And so this is something that you need to keep in mind. And once again, within Irish kind of within Irish plays, in fact, the figure of the tramp becomes very important. So a tramp is basically an aimless wanderer who travels on foot from one county to another, visiting several villages, and he stays in some village one night, and the next night he goes to another village. So he basically is always out on the road. But the figure of the tramp again kind of symbolizes for Irish nationalists this sense of the sense of an autonomy. So the tramp is often kind of associated also with the figure of the poet, with the figure of the artist, as the figure of the artist who is not chained down, or who is not kind of weighed down by all kinds of restrictions. This is an autonomous artist who can, who can create, on whose creations there are no boundaries. He can create in the way he wants to. So a complete artistic freedom is kind of symbolized by the tramp. And so when Nora walks out with the tramp into the night, she also kind of, with an association with the tramp, she also comes to embody this sense of a spirit, this sense of a freedom of spirit, this sense of an artistic creative freedom that she comes to symbolize. And the figure of the tramp, in fact, even in a play like Samuel Beckett's Waiting for Godot, and I think we discussed Waiting for Godot, well, a little bit of that in the previous session. And Waiting for Godot, in fact, in very recent scholarship, Waiting for Godot kind of also symbolizes the post-colonial landscape of Ireland. So the two figures, Vladimir and Estragon, in Samuel Beckett's Waiting for Godot, they are two tramps. If you remember, these two figures, they are two tramps, and so they also kind of come to symbolize, the kind of the poverty and the ruination that the tramp had undergone in the wake of British colonization in Ireland. So that is something that becomes important. And as far as this is all about, in the shadow of the glen. And as far as the Playboy of the Western World is concerned, it is important because it kind of marks another very important kind of a protest movement within Ireland. So this was with the first staging of the Playboy of the Western World. What happens is something called the Playboy riots take place, and this happened sometime in 1907. So in the shadow of the glen was something that really kind of agitated nationalist feelings, because of the kind of descriptions that it had of open open conversations about sexuality and infidelity and all of that. So that kind of really worked to antagonize nationalist sentiments. But the Playboy of the Western World finally kind of it kind of that politics of reception kind of reaches its zenith almost. That's the climax, right? So of people being completely hostile to the kind of thematics that were being explored in this play. And the reason why this happens is, of course, that two reasons. First of all, is that the subject matter of the play. So Christy Mahon, who is kind of the protagonist of the play, and he is in fact the Playboy of the Western World. Christy Mahon he tries to kill his father off. So killing your father off, so that killing your father kind of becomes sort of it's unthinkable for the nationalists, and that kind of, because it kind of sullies, kind of pollutes the figure, the characterization of a pristine Ireland. So that is something that trips the nationalists off. And the second thing, of course, is the use of the word shift in the play. What is a shift? A shift is, of course, a woman's undergarment, a petticoat of sorts. So how could you talk about something that is, as it's supposed to be very hush hush? Why would you talk about something like a shift on the open stage? So these were like the two major kind of points that kind of triggered the nationalists off and brought about the Playboy riots of 1907. Now, in the shadow of the glen, the setting is, of course, one single cottage. So Nora's cottage becomes the setting in the shadow of the glen. But the focus in the Playboy kind of shifts from a single cottage to an entire village, right? So the village that Christy Mahon she comes to, that becomes the setting, and the entire village population is in fact kind of they kind of tune in. They kind of become major key players within this play. And this village is situated somewhere in the western coast of Ireland. And this setting is also significantly important because this particular area, the western coast of Ireland, was supposed to be a very remote area. It was thought within the nationalist conception of the peasant as the custodian of Irish repository of Irish culture and all of that. The idea was that this particular area, the western coast of Ireland, was a place that was unpolluted, that was untouched, that was unsullied by imperialism. So that it was not, it had still not been influenced by any kind of English culture. So this particular place was thought to be inherently Irish. So if Singh kind of brings up as the setting for his play this kind of an area, and then he talks about all kinds of obscenities in the daily lives of this rural people, then you know that he's also upsetting. He's first of all he's working to kind of again destabilize the traditional narratives about peasant rural life and women folk and all of that, the values and morals of the rural people. But he's upsetting those ideas, and he's kind of challenging that entire construct of a pristine, unpolluted, very chaste and chaste construction of an Ireland. So that is something that Singh also does in Playboy. So one of the major markers of one of the most kind of important things that we need to talk about in Playboy is, of course, that there is a lot of vulgar dialogue within the play. So the kind of words or the kind of situations or the kind of phenomena that one should not really talk about in the open, that are supposed to be really secretive, that is something that you should only talk about within the four walls of your room, that kind of talk is being very openly kind of dispersed in the form of dialogue on the open stage. So that is something that James Singh is doing, and so he's doing away with all kinds of ideas of authentic Irish regionalism. So he's completely breaking that kind of a stereotype, and what he does is he in fact goes on to display peasant rural domesticity in all its rawness. So he does not really hide anything. He talks about the good, he also talks about the bad. And like I previously mentioned, Christy Mahon kind of talks about the act of killing his father. And obviously, if you've read the play, and this is a play that you should definitely read, when Christy talks about killing of his father and all of that, uh, it's definitely an exaggeration. The way, I mean, with every telling, with the telling and the retelling of that narrative in front of different sections of the population in the village, Christy Mahon, he kind of changes that narrative dramatically. At one moment, he starts off in a particular strain, and in the next narrative that he kind of retells in front of another group, he's completely exaggerating that. He's taking that a degree higher. So, a kind of mm, a constant non-stop exaggeration works is at work here, and this kind of is very easily, the Irish community in that particular setting, they very easily they kind of eat that up. They kind of really relish that kind of a narrative, because what Singh is trying to do here is trying to show that these peasant folk in Ireland, they are imaginatively, they're imaginatively starved. So this kind of a dramatic narrative kind of adds to a kind of imaginative nourishment, a kind of creative nourishment for these people. So whatever hocus pocus that he he prefigures, whatever he says, whatever he cooks up, the people readily agree, and they're like and they do not even think that this is exaggeration. They readily agree, and they readily they take it as truth. And But Christy Mahon again, this act of resisting the father, this act of kind of trying to kill the father, is in fact symbolic of resisting the tyranny of the father. And a son killing a father and then talking and then kind of narrativizing that kind of becomes another major trigger for the nationalists in Dublin. And there's a lot of concern with patriarchal authority in the play, as of course through Christy Mahon's kind of narrativizing of his of the killing of his father. And also there is this one figure called Sean Keogh, and Sean Keogh is again somebody who is slated to marry another woman. And when Christy arrives in the village, Piggy, in that woman, she kind of takes to Christy, and Sean kind of feels alienated and all of that. But Sean is kind of this Sean provides this foil to Christie, because as opposed to Christie, who kind of defies all kind of patriarchal tyranny and authority, Christie is again subdued by patriarchal authority. So here, patriarchal authority, in the case of Sean, comes to be the Catholic Church, the Roman Catholic Church. And this basically kind of is a reference to the Christian, the Christian missionaries who came to Ireland, and they were trying to kind of they were trying to kind of turn these people into into Christians, these pagan Irish people into Christians. So Sean, in fact, comes to be very scared of this particular figure called Father Riley, who happens to be, he happens to be this representative of the Roman Catholic Church. So between Sean and Christie, we see a complete kind of they're like foils to each other in that particular sense. And because I talked about Christie's narrative telling and retelling, so the theme of talk. So this act of narrativizing, this act of telling a story again and again, the same story, this act of narrating a story, that becomes very important, because these kind of narratives are, in fact, they come to signify a kind of a they come to signify a a sense of they become a source of succor and strength, and kind of a communitarian feeling emerges out of the kind of retelling of stories and the retelling of narratives. So the theme of talk again is very important, and this is because this is very symbolic of the rural culture of Ireland. So there's not a lot of writing that goes on there. So whatever community history that these people have, that kind of gets translated, and that kind of gets that is kind of transported through this act of telling and retelling stories, because speech in fact becomes, it kind of becomes this storehouse of national and communitarian identity within the nationalist concerns of Ireland. And once again, like in the figure of Nora in the previous play, in this particular play as well, Pigin, this woman that Christy Mahon kind of gets attracted to, and she also, vice versa, she gets attracted to him. So this woman Pigin, and then there's this another figure called Widow Queen. So basically, Widow Queen is basically, as the name suggests, she is a widow. So she's supposed to be morally chaste, right? She's supposed to be not engaging in any kind of sexual sexual acts outside of her marriage, and her husband is dead, so she's supposed to be celibate now. But that does not happen in this play, as there are implicit references here and there about these women also kind of exercising a kind of a sexual autonomy. So in this way, these women kind of again destabilize that pristine idea of the Irish woman, and they instead become really sexually devious characters. And what is exactly Singh trying to do through these kind of depictions in his plays? He's basically trying to upset any idea, any ideological construct of a very homogeneous idea of the Irish. So Irish life all over the country is not uniform. Irish morals, Irish sense of culture is also not uniform. It is a heterogeneous field. The realm of culture is heterogeneous, and it is not homogeneous. So that is basically what Singh seems to be driving at through his plays. Okay, so that was basically about James Singh and William Butler Yeats, two very major playwrights associated with the Abbey Theatre. And the plays that I discussed, the three plays that I discussed, you definitely should read up the three plays. And as far as Singh is concerned, you could actually kind of read the other four plays. If not the other four plays, then at least kind of try to read Riders to the Sea, which I think people have read, and The Well of the Saints, where religion becomes the bone of contention once again, and of course The Tinker's Wedding. These are the plays that you should be completely familiar with. And then a few other names that we need to kind of take note of course, as far as Irish dramatic revival is concerned, is someone called Sean O'Casey. He writes Juno and the Paycock, and this is kind of his kind of you could say his magnum opus of sorts. And this is again another play that you should familiarize yourself with. And then again another playwright, and these are actually the last three playwrights: Brian Friel, Brendan Behan, and Tom Murphy. These are people who write from within a post-colonial context. So Singh and William Butler Yeats, all of these people write from a colonial context, but that 1964, this is much after Ireland becomes a republic. So Brian Friel and Brendan Behan and Tom Murphy, they write from within a post-colonial Ireland. So some of their major plays for Brian Friel, of course, Philadelphia, Here I Come, The Freedom of the City, and Translations. Three very, very, very important plays as far as Irish post colonialism is concerned. Um, Philadelphia, Here I Come Again talks about this question, the entire question of Irish immigration after, after Ireland kind of becomes a republic. The social conditions, the economic conditions do not undergo a massive change. The promise of industrial revolution kind of fizzles out, and so people are kind of forced to venture outside in the outside world for economic sustenance. So that is one of the major themes of Philadelphia, Here I Come. For translations, again, translations is a very important play that I think everyone should at least read the summary, if not the play itself. In translations, what Brandfield does is he takes up the issue of language. So I spoke about how the English, they were trying to kind of anglicize everything in Ireland. So in translations, we see that the English have sent kind of engineers and official kind of members of the government into a particular place in Ireland, and they're trying to kind of anglicize all the Irish place names into English. That is something that they're trying to do. So how does the community resist that, and are they able to resist that at all, and how, and what do they feel about their own native language? So all of these ideas are again worked through in translations. And then again, the next two plays, Brendan Behan, The Queer Fellow, and Tom Murphy, The Wake. These are also kind of important plays as far as Irish nationalism is concerned. But then, of course, these three playwrights are writing from within a post-colonial context. So maybe you can, maybe you can, Google up these names and read a few things about these people and all of that. So that is it for the Irish literary renaissance. If these are the, these are the major basic points that one could cover. But of course, you could definitely look up some other history of literature books and read a bit more about the Irish literary context if you want. But this is it for the Irish dramatic revival. Now, I think people were talking about literary terms and all of that. Sorry. So, see, for literary terms, the best thing to do is make a suggestive list, and this is whatever you see on the screen right now is as suggestive as it can get. I mean, these are some of the basic things that you could look into. And you can, I am not really going to read out what is bathos and what is blank verse. I'm sure everyone has access to the MH Abrams book, The Glossary of Literary Terms. So you can actually look at these terms in that book, understand the technicalities associated with each term, and then you can actually kind of note down the major authors, and who kind of utilize these styles, who utilize these techniques. So bathos, blank verse, carpe diem, heroic couplet, and ode, especially, two types of odes, a pindaric ode and a Horatian ode. And if you go through the Glossary of Literary Terms, that book, you'll see that there's authors are listed according to who writes in the pindaric format of the ode, who writes in the Juvenalian form of the satire, who writes in the Horatian form of the satire. Examples also you will get. And this is from the poetry part. From drama, of course, a few terms that people could look at is chorus, hamartia, anagnorisis, catastrophe, hubris, three unities. But one other thing that I would suggest for drama is, for these kind of technical terms associated with drama, is you could actually go and read up poetics. Poetics, if you do read that up, then I think conceptually you are all set for anything, any kind of literary term that comes out of drama. That it should really help you. And a few other terms that I think are kind of important. Of course, affective fallacy, emotional fallacy, pathetical. Sorry, it should be pathetic fallacy. I think I've mistyping again. It's pathetic fallacy. So these three terms again, please be kind of aware of these three terms, what they mean, and you can look that up in the M.H. Abrams book. And beat movement. Okay, for the different kinds of movements that we talk about within modernism and postmodernism, a quick Google search will give you an exhaustive list. Okay, so you could actually Google key uh, movements, cultural aesthetic movements within modernism. You could Google cultural aesthetic movements within postmodernism. So if you Google these, you will get an exhaustive list of terms. And then when you have time, you can, according to your own convenience, you can make your small notes, you can jot down the important points, the important people associated with each movement. That is something that you can do as far as arts and aesthetics and music and all of those other cultural registers are concerned. That is something that you can do. Now beat movement is something that is very, very important within the counterculture movement within American modernism and postmodernism. So mainly the two people, well, there are several other people, but the two most famous people associated with this movement would be someone called Allen Ginsberg. Now Ginsberg is also another poet that you need to be aware of as far as American postmodern modern poetry is concerned. So I think Ginsberg, everyone has heard of Ginsberg. So maybe you could read a few of his poems, the most famous ones like Howl and Kaddish, and then there is something called A Supermarket in California, and all of that. So you could actually look up Allen Ginsberg and read a few of his poems. And then someone, of course, called Jack Kerouac. Jack Kerouac, very famous book that he writes is On the Road. And I think a lot of people might have read Jack Kerouac as well. So these are some of the names that you could Google. But I think you are slated for another session for American history of American literature or something like that. So I think Ananda is going to kind of touch upon these well, kind of recent movements in the arts and aesthetics in America. So beat movement is something that you should definitely look up, and also two other things is you should look up black literature. Black literature as in African American literature or literature from the African diaspora, all of that you could look up. And another thing that you should look up, and this is something that I've forgotten to mention in this list here, is there is this one term which is the I think well, black arts, black literature is something that you will find in M.H. Abrams and also Harlem Renaissance. I'm sure Oyunda is going to cover Harlem Renaissance when he does American history of literature. But Harlem Renaissance is also something that you should look up from M.H. Abrams. And then, like I said, you could actually look up, you could actually Google Google up a few countercultural aesthetic movements within modernism and postmodernism. So some very common and basic names that really came to mind. So I've noted them down: expressionism, imagism. So all kind of isms, absurdism, existentialism. So all kind of isms you should kind of look up and kind of gain an idea about, like what is the conceptual framework for each of these movements and who are the major people associated with it. So this is something that you should know about these kind of movements. So that would be basically it. And do not confine yourself to just literature. So Dadaism within literature, surrealist poetry only. No, you have to look into, surrealist painting. You have to look into other forms of, cultural representation as well, not just literature. Because oftentimes, you get questions from music, from paintings as well. So make sure you look all of this up. So I think that would be it as far as my discussion is concerned. But yeah, so that is pretty much it. But do you have anything to say? Do you want to ask something? Any queries that you have? One of you could respond. You can turn on your mic, or you can just write in the chat box. That would be all right.
I had a question.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask about the poetry session. Was it slated for this day?
Sorry, could you repeat? I couldn't hear you.
Hello.
Yeah.
Can you hear me? Yeah, I
Yeah.
wanted to ask about the poetry session. Was it slated for today?
Yeah, it was. But listen, as far as the poetry is concerned, see, I
Okay, okay.
basically
Yeah, so basically what is happening is that with poetry, because you're not really writing anything per se. Like you have to like MCQs aayenge, right? You have to like tick something like that, right? So with poetry what you could do is you can look into these kind of literary terms. That is one thing that you could do. And the other thing, like preparation wise, like what could you do on your own? If that is something that we're talking about, then that is something, literary terms is something you can do. And the other thing, I think I saw that there was a lot of talk about rhetorical devices in the group last night. I think in the WhatsApp group people were talking about metonymy and synecdoche and pun, and I think exaggeration and all of that. So rhetorical devices is also something that you could look into, because कभी कभी MCQs में आ जाते हैं. But देखो, other than that, poetry में there is nothing that you can inherently prepare on your own and then you go out and, because you don't know on a given day what kind of poems they will throw at you. They might throw at you a poem from the Augustan age. They might throw at you something that is very postmodern. They could also give you a Larkin poem, or a poem by Sylvia Plath if you're lucky, or a poem by anybody that you have not read before. So how do you prepare for an unknown poem? You can't really do that. So the only thing that you can do as far as poetry is concerned is you can make it a habit to read a lot of poetry, because the things that one looks out for is that the kind of allusions and references and the kind of symbolism that goes into a poem. So those are the things that you could be aware of, and that awareness you can cultivate only by making poetry reading a practice. If you make that a habit, then I don't think you will have a lot of problem as far as poetry is concerned. The other thing for poetry is sometimes they ask you kind of questions from literary theory. They'll give you a stanza or a poem, and they would kind of ask you to identify which kind of a literary tool or a literary theoretical tool or a literary theoretical discourse is being propagated through that particular stanza. So suppose there might be poems which have something to do with psychoanalysis. There might be poems that have some kind of a Marxist ideology embedded within them. So you have to identify those things. Now those things you will be able to do when you know your literary theory well. So that is something. And one other thing, as far as poem comprehension and poetry comprehension is concerned, is that always be very aware of the kind of ideas that are being generated from line one, and always note down the progression of thought as it kind of comes down to you through the poem. So a poem might start in a certain way, and then by the end of the stanza that you're given, the prose passage, the poem that you're given, you'll see that the idea might have the idea might have been developed. The idea might have been completely subverted. It might have been completely challenged. So those are the things that you need to look for. Other than that, there is nothing that can essentially prepare you for an unknown poem that you might face in the exam hall. I mean, I can't even like give you a suggestive list of the poets that you need to read up or look up. So that is something that you have to kind of attempt right then and there, and definitely your presence of mind would serve you right in those situations. So that is as far as poetry is concerned. Whatever you can do is you can look up literary terms, rhetorical devices like synecdoche, transferred epithet, personification, this that this these are things that you can do on your own. But on a given day, on that particular paper, what kind of a poem comes, I mean, you might very well be challenged with the kind of poem that comes, but then you have to kind of put in your whatever you have learned, your intellectual resources to try and figure out that poem. That is something that is entirely up to you on the individual. Okay. Any other concerns that you might have? If not, then we can close down this session, and then the next session that I have is on literary theory, and we can meet on the next day. Okay.